the MERN stack, Mongo, Express, React, Node. We're going to be covering all of those except for React. So basically just the backend part of the MERN stack. It's going to be too easy. It's going to be a great time. So let's do it. All right. So right here, we just have an empty project with nothing in it. First thing we're going to do, we're going to say npm init, and we're going to say -y. This is going to start up our Node environment. And so this is all that it gives us. So right now, this is set up to use JavaScript. We're going to be using TypeScript because you can't be using JavaScript. That is a joke. So first thing we got to do is install some packages. We're going to install Express. We're going to install Mongoose. This is how we're going to interact with MongoDB. And then a couple of other things. So we're going to install those. And so you can see this added the package lock and the node modules. Now what we're going to install, we're going to say npm install -- save dev. These are going to be dev dependencies. If we end up deploying this, these are not going to be there. These are just for development. So we got some TypeScript stuff, a couple of types for these things. So just add all those and then click enter. And then boom, now you can see we got our dev dependencies. And also what I'm going to do is I'm going to say git init. And so now this is going to be able to work with GitHub. But you can see we got node modules. We don't want that. So we're going to create a new file called git ignore. And in here, we're going to add node modules. We're going to save that. And so now this grays out and we can see we only have 3 changes. Also, we're going to add a .env file. We're going to add some things to this later. And in here also, we're going to add .env. So you can see this is now grayed out. So now that we've added all these packages, we want to initialize TypeScript. So what we're going to do for that, we're going to say npx tsc -- init. And so you can see this is going to add this TypeScript file for us. And it has all of this information. This is just basically the settings for TypeScript. So I'm going to delete all these comments because this is very stupid to look at. All right, so when we clean that all up, it's going to look like this. You can change these. You can have a bunch of different TypeScript settings. We're just going to stick with the default settings. So first thing we're going to do, we're going to create a file called server.ts. And so in here, we can just say console.log server running. And in order to execute this, we're going to come over here to package.json. This script that says test, we can get rid of this. We're going to create one called dev. And what it's going to be, we're going to say nodemon -- exec. And then we're going to say npx ts -node. And we're going to say source / server.ts. And so I also need to add the server ts file to a source directory. So we're going to add that in here. And so now if we come down here and we say npm run dev, because we called this dev, click enter, we can see that it says server running, which is exactly what we wrote right here. And if this doesn't work for you, that means you need to install nodemon. So all you're going to do to add that, you're going to say npm install -g nodemon. And so this is going to add nodemon to your entire system. This is assuming that you already have Node. So if you don't have that, go to the internet, download npm, and you'll be fine. So what we could do is just simply use Node, and then every single time we start the server, it's just going to run it. The reason why we want to use nodemon is because when we save it, so like if I just add some stuff and save this, nodemon is going to make it so it's automatically going to rerun with the save changes. So nodemon just makes it much easier to develop these things. All right, so now we're going to get this actually set up. We're actually going to create our Express server. So we're going to import a couple of things. We're going to say import .env from .env, and then we're going to immediately do .env.config. This is going to allow us to use this .env file. And you're going to want to make sure to do this before all of your other imports, because we're going to import some things from other files. And if this doesn't run before those are imported, and we're trying to use environment variables in those imported files, .env is not going to work in those files. So then we're also going to import Express from Express. We're going to import cores from cores. And then we're going to come down here. We're going to say const app equals Express. So this is our Express app. And then we're going to come out here. We're going to say const port equals process.env.port or 3000. I'm not going to include that. I'm just going to have it like this. And so we come in here to the .env file, and we're going to say port equals 3000. So now this is going to know to get that from this file. And when you actually deploy this, all of this code is going to be on GitHub. And then when you deploy it, you add the .env file separately when you deploy it. So that way you can have a bunch of secrets in here. So then we're going to come below this and we're going to add some middleware. And all middleware is something that runs before every single request. So when someone makes a request to your API, it's going to first run through the middleware. And so we're going to add this app.use cores. And so this is for cross-origin resource sharing. And the reason we do this is because unless the requests come from the same place that the API is, then it's not going to work. So we need to add this to allow cross-origin resource sharing. Then we're also going to add this. And so the reason we use this is so that every single request that is made to our API, it's just going to be a string. It's just going to be a string. It's going to be JSON, which is basically, it's just a string. And so what this is going to do is every single request that's made, the body, it's going to convert that to a JavaScript object rather than JSON, which is just simply a string. So once we add that middleware, we can come out here and we can say const start server, and this is going to be a function. It's going to be an async function. We're going to use a try catch block that is going to be basically this. And so we're going to save this. And now you can see with the nodemon, well, we actually need to call this function. So start server. And so now you can see server is running on port 3000. And the reason we put this in an async function is because later when we start the server, before we actually get the port set up, we're going to set up our MongoDB connection. So we need to put this in a function so that it can be async. We're also going to come down here and we're going to say process.exit with 1. This is just basically a way to like cancel the program if any type of error occurs. And instead of using these messages, I'm going to use these because they're way doper. So let me get both of these in here. Boom. Okay, we're looking good. All right, so now we're going to add some routes. So we're going to come right here. We're going to say routes, and we're going to say app dot, and we're going to say use. We're going to say slash users, and then we're going to say user routes. So we need to create this user routes, and then these are all going to be accessible at http localhost 3000/users. So we're going to come in here to the source. We're going to create a new file, routes/users.ts. So we're going to say const router equals router. We're going to import that from Express. And then right here, we're going to say router.get. So this is going to be our hello world. And so also we're going to, this is a request, so we can import this type from Express. And we're also going to import response from Express. So our server is running on localhost 3000. And this right here is running on users because we have the app.use/user. So let's import this. So in order to import this, we need to come back to the users file and we're going to say export default router. And so now we are importing all of the user routes and setting them right here on /users. So if you come to your web browser and you just type in http localhost 3000/users, you're going to get this hello world. And if we want to change this to what up though, and then we come back over here and we refresh this, boom, it's going to be whatever we write in here. Also, if you're enjoying this, follow me on X and subscribe. I got the links both below. Also, the GitHub repo is below as well. So the first thing we're going to want to do is create a user. So instead of this being get, we're going to say post. And then right here, we're going to make this async. And then instead of this, we're going to have a try catch block. And then right here for now, we're just going to say const user equals null. And then we're going to say res for response. We'll say status 201, and we're going to return the user in JSON format. If there's an error, we're just going to use this right here. So if you want to write that down real quick, the error is not too important. So now if we save that, actually what I'm going to do instead of null, I'm going to say like username is whatever, email is whatever. And so now if we do a post request, it's going to run this. And so what I use is this thing called Thunder Client. So all you got to do is go to extensions, type in Thunder Client. This is basically like Postman, and you're going to install that. And so now if I come over here and I do a new request, instead of a get request, we're going to do a post. We're going to set this to local host. And instead of posts, we're going to say users. and we're going to say send. And you can see now that it responded with the newly created user. So now to actually create these users, we're going to set up our connection to MongoDB. So to set up MongoDB, we're going to need a couple of things. First thing you're going to need is MongoDB Compass. So use the link below and you're going to install all of this MongoDB stuff. And this MongoDB Compass is how you're going to be able to actually look at your database. And this is just going to be locally on your machine. And one more thing you're going to need is Docker. So if you don't have Docker already, I'll have a link below on how to add Docker, because what we're going to be doing is we're going to be running a MongoDB container on our machine. And then this right here, this MongoDB Compass just basically connects to that container and lets us see all of the information that's actually in our container. So once you have Docker installed and MongoDB Compass, we're going to run this. So it says Docker run D for detached, so it's not going to show all the logs in here. And then we're going to name it whatever we want. We're going to name it Mongo. We're going to specify the port that it's running on. And then this is the image name. And so when you run this, if you don't already have this image on your machine, it's automatically going to pull that image down on your machine, and then it's going to run it as a container. So this is all we get. And then if we say Docker PS, we can see I have a container running on my machine. And if you have Docker desktop and you come over to containers, I can also see it right here. So I would also recommend installing Docker desktop. It's very easy to see what containers you have running and manage all of them. It's very easy. All right, so now that we have our container running, we can come over to MongoDB Compass and we're going to hit this plus button. And we're just going to call this Express app. And then we're going to copy this and we're going to save and connect. And so you can see that this successfully connected. And the reason it did that is because we have this container running right here. So now that we have that copied, we're going to come over here to our .env file and we're going to say Mongo_URI equals that. And then we're going to put main right here. You have to name your database. So you can call this whatever you want. So now that we have our database actually running on our machine, we need to connect this express code to that. So we're going to come in here and source, and we're going to create a file called db/index.ts. And then we're going to add all of this code right here, this function connect db. And so you can see it gets our Mongo URI from our .env file. If it's not there, it says you need this. And then we just simply say mongoose connect with the Mongo URI. So we're going to save this, and then we're going to come back over here to server. And then right here, we're going to say await, and we're going to say connect DB. And so now if we save that, we can see down here, MongoDB connected successfully and the server is running. So now our Express app is ready to actually interact with the MongoDB. And how you do that is we're going to come into DB. We're going to create a new file. We're going to call this models/user.ts. And this is where you create your user schema. So I just have this very, very simple. We just have a username, a password, and then posts, because we're going to have users and each user is going to have posts. And then right here, this thing that says timestamps true, this is going to automatically create a created at and updated at field for each user. And so I would definitely recommend using this. So this is how we create our user schema. And then right here, we're going to create this thing called user right here. And then we're going to export that. So now if we come over to our routes and users, we can now say right here, await user, import that .create request.body. And we can also say const user equals that. And so now if we've set everything up correctly, if we come over here back to our Thunder client and we come over here to body, and then we're going to say username is Cole, and we're just going to simply say password is Blender. And so now if we send this, status 201 created, and this is what it returns for us. So now if we come back to MongoDB Compass and we click on this Express app and we click refresh, we can now see we have main, we have users, and we have the user that we just created. So one thing that we're going to change actually is this thing that says posts. We're going to get rid of this. We don't need this because each post is going to have something called author ID. When we fetch a user's post, we're going to say, fetch me all posts that have author ID equal to this user ID. So we can get rid of that. And then I'm going to come back over here And I'm just going to simply drop this collection. And then I'm going to come back to Thunder Client, create another user, boom, refresh this. All right. All right. So this is to create a user. Then we're going to copy this and paste it down. And we're going to say fetch user. And we're going to want to fetch a user by the user ID. So in MongoDB, you can see right here, we have this thing ID. When you create anything in MongoDB, it's automatically going to create this. So you should definitely use these as the ID rather than creating your own. So we're going to say fetch ID or fetch user. And then right here, we're going to say user ID. And so now what this, and we're also going to make this a get request. So now what this is expecting is, because right here we have /users, this is expecting at localhost 3000 /users/user ID. And we're going to be able to get that user ID. And we're going to get that from the request params.user ID. Just this has to be the same as this. You can make this whatever you want. And instead of user create, we're going to say user find by ID. And instead of this error code, I'm going to pass this in. This doesn't really matter. And then we're going to say if there's no user, we're going to return a 404 status code saying the user is not found. If the user is found, then we're just simply going to return the user in JSON format. And we're actually going to get rid of these squiggly braces and we're just going to simply return the user. So if we come back to, well, we can actually just go to this Thunder client. We can see we have the user ID right here. So if we copy this and now we go to our web browser, localhost 3000 /users, put that in, boom. Now we get the user returned. All right, so now we can create a user, fetch a user. This is the C and the R in CRUD. Now we're going to update a user and delete a user. So I'm just going to paste this code in and we're going to have router.put. This is the request method when you update something. And then again, just like fetch user, we're going to get the user ID from the params. And then we have this other thing right here, authenticate token. So we don't want anyone to be able to update a user unless they're logged in. So what this is right here, this is middleware, and we're going to write this ourselves. That basically says anytime someone comes to this route, before any of this code is run, it's going to first run this function that is going to check to see if they're logged in. So we'll write that in a second, but you can see in here, we're using the user dot find by ID and update. This is all just very straightforward stuff. We have this new set to true, so we're getting the updated user, and then we're just returning it. So what we need to do is write this function right here. So we're going to come into source, and we're going to say middleware /authenticate token.ts. And so what we're going to need to do is first, we're going to say npm install JSON web token. And then we're going to say npm install -- save dev, the types for JSON web token. So now that we have that, we can start writing our code for this. The first thing we're going to need to do actually is come into our .env file and we're going to create a JWT secret. And you can make this whatever you want. What I would recommend doing is coming to your terminal and saying open SSL rand -base6432. It's going to create this. You copy this, you come in here, you paste this, remove that. And so this is how the JSON web token works. It's going to use this to authenticate that the JSON web token was actually created by our Express app rather than just some other person on the internet. So the first thing we're going to do in this authenticate token file is we're going to import these things right here. And then we're going to get our JWT signing key from our .env file. If it's not there, we're going to say this thing is not set. And then we're going to create this type right here because we're going to specify that the request is not just a generic request. It's going to be a request where we expect this user to be in the request. So here's the function right here, authenticate token. So you can see instead of just using requests, we're using authenticated requests. So then when we go to in this request thing right here, we can come right here and say .user, and this thing knows that it should be expecting the user. So the first thing this is going to do, it's going to look at the headers, which we're going to, when you actually write a fetch request in JavaScript, you add in the headers. And so there will be something that's authorization. and then you'll say bearer, and then you'll have the web token. And so that's exactly what this is getting. That is getting this value. And so we're going to say if it's not there, or it's there but it doesn't start with bearer, we're going to say unauthorized access. This is not a legit token. Get out of here. If there is one, then we're going to get just the token, which is basically, this is going to say bearer space and then a long random looking string. And so this is going to get us just that random looking string. And then we're going to do this try catch. And so right here, we're going to get this value decoded from JWT. That's the JSON web token. We're going to say dot verify. We're going to say, given the token that this guy just passed in, and given our JSON web token signing secret, is this token legit? So what some people do is they actually set the user in the middleware. We're not going to do that. So we can just remove this and remove this. So we're going to say verify this. If it's not verified, it's going to throw an error. So it will go to this catch block and it will not proceed. If this doesn't throw an error, then this next function right here, which we get, which the middleware expects there to be the next parameter, then this basically just says move on. So in our case, it's just going to go to all of this code, but you could have more middleware in here if you wanted. So we're going to save this file. We're going to come over here. We're going to import this. We're going to save that. So now if we come over here to Thunder Client, instead of a post request, we're going to say put, we're going to say users slash, we're going to get the user ID. And then this also expects a body, and we're going to just put in the username and change it. And then we're going to send this message, unauthorized access, missing or invalid token. So we didn't pass in this. We didn't pass in the JSON web token. And how we get that is we need to log in. So we need to create a route to log in right now. So we're going to come over here to routes, and we're going to create a new file called auth.ts. And so this code right here is going to log the user in. So we're going to say router.post. So this is going to be at /auth/login. We need to actually come over here and say app.use/auth. And we're going to call this auth routes. And so we can import that right here. This is going to be /routes/auth. And this is going to be called auth routes. So at /auth/login, this is going to be available. So what this expects is in the body of the request, there's going to be a username and a password. We're then going to query the Mongo database. We're going to say, find a user that has this username. We're then going to say, if there's not a user, or the user's password doesn't equal the password they just passed in, we're going to say invalid credentials. And if you were making a real app, you would not want to do this. You don't want to just store the password as a normal string. You want to hash the password so that if someone ever hacks into your database, it doesn't just show, oh, this email and this password. Okay, I'm going to start trying this username and password at a bunch of different websites. And then, people use the same password all the time. So yeah, you wouldn't actually do this, but just for this is very simple. So then we're going to get the JSON secret that we have in our .env file. We're going to say if they don't have it, throw an error. And then we're going to say the token equals JWT.sign. And we're going to use the user's ID. We're going to pass in the secret. And then we can say when we want this to expire. And then we're going to return the token and the user. So when we log in, we're going to get this token and we're going to get this user. And what you would do on the front end is you would save the token using local storage. And then in all of your fetch requests to the backend, you pass in the token in the headers. Or another way you can do it is using HTTP only cookies, but we're just going to do this because this is very simple. So now we have this route called login. So if we come over here, I'm actually going to create a new request. We're going to come to this one. We're going to copy this route. We're going to paste it in here. And this is going to be at auth/login. And this is going to be a post request. And in the body, we're going to pass in the username, which right now is Cole. So the username is Cole. And we're going to send this error, invalid credentials, because I also need to pass in the password, which right now is Blender. So send this, boom, we are logged in, and you can see it gives us this super long string that is our token. So we're going to copy this. And now when we come back to this update user in this authorization, it's going to say bearer with that. So now, so we have our body, We're changing our username from Cole to Cole Blender. If we send, boom, it has been successfully updated. If we come to our MongoDB, it says Cole. If I refresh this, it's now Cole Blender. And you can see updated at was also updated. And so the reason I pass it in the headers is because I wanted you to see what's actually happening. But if we're using Thunder Client, you can come in here to Auth, go to bearer, and you can just paste it in right there, which is much simpler. So now if we send this, it's going to work still. So now we're going to come back to the users routes. We can now update a user, and now to delete a user, it's going to be very similar to this code right here. But we're going to say router.delete. It's going to expect the user ID, the authenticate token, because we don't want someone to delete if they're not actually signed in. And then we're going to use the user ID to find by ID and delete. And then we're going to find all of the posts that were made by that user, and we're going to delete all of those posts. And so now what we need to do is create our post model and add some post routes. So we're going to come here to models. We're going to create a new file. We're going to call this post.ts. And then we're going to create our post schema. It's very similar to the user schema. So we have the author ID, and this is going to be the ID of the person who made the post. And then we're going to have the content. This is just like basically the tweet, and then the likes, which is an array. And this is also going to be the user ID of whoever liked it. So we're going to save this. Then we're going to come back to this delete user route, and then we're going to import post. And so now this will delete all the posts, but there are no posts, so nothing's going to happen. We need to now come to our routes, new file. We'll call this posts.ts. And so I'm just going to paste all these routes in here. So we have our create post, which is very similar to creating our user. I'm actually going to remove this because we don't need to include that. So we can also remove this. We can fetch an individual post. So just like we were fetching a user, you can fetch a post by passing in the post ID. And then we've got this right here. So we're going to fetch posts with filters. So I'll explain what this does a little bit. Before we do that, we're going to come to the server, and we're going to add the route for posts. I'm going to call this post routes. And we're going to come up here. We're going to import that and rename this to post routes. And then in order for me to show you what this does better, let's come over here, and we're going to create some posts. So instead of this being auth, this is going to be posts. And then there's going to be nothing right there. So if we come over here to our model for a post, it expects the author ID and the content. Likes are not required. It's just going to default to an empty array. So the author ID is going to be this, our user ID. So we're going to say author ID is going to be this, and then content is just going to be, what up, bro? So we're going to send this unauthorized access, invalid token. So we come to posts, we can see when we create a post, we actually want to make sure that the user is signed in. So come back to this, and we have our bearer token, copy that. And then in here in auth bearer, paste that in. Now it actually created this post. So I'm going to just create this over and over and over. We'll come here, we'll change this text. We'll create some more of those. So now if we come over to our MongoDB, we click this, we click refresh. We can now see that we have posts, and we can see we have 24 posts. So now if we come over here to posts, I can explain what's going on here. So when you fetch a user's post, you go to like a user's X account. You don't just fetch all of their posts immediately. That would be absurd. So you do something like infinite scroll, or like you could use pagination. Most social media is going to use infinite scroll. So what's happening is they're making a request to the back end of only like the 20 most recent posts. And then once you're scrolling down, it's like, okay, we're getting close to the end. Now let's get the next 20 posts. And it does that over and over and over. So when you do the fetch posts, what you're going to pass in, you want the author ID. When we use request.query instead of request.params, like .post ID, this is going to get it in the actual path, like / post ID. This is going to be like this. So it's going to be the URL, and then it's going to be question mark, and it's going to say author ID equals the author ID, and then it's going to say and limit equals whatever, and page equals whatever. So we're going to pass in the author ID. We're going to pass in the limit. If they don't pass in the limit, it's going to default to 10. If they don't pass in the page, it's going to default to 1. Really, they is us because we're going to write the front end that makes these requests. But this is just a good fallback in case something weird happens. So we're going to say, if there's not an author ID, say author ID is required. So for the page number, we're going to convert this to a number because when it's passed in the URL, it's a string. And we have this right here because in case like they pass in page equals what's up, this is going to mess up. And then we do the same thing to the limit number and skip. This is like basically if we're on the second page, we're going to skip the first 10. And so we say post.find, they have to have an author ID equal to the author ID we passed in, and then limit is our limit number. So 10, skip, we get skip from using the page number and the limit number. And then we're going to sort all of them so that the newest one is on top. And then we're just going to return the posts. So we're going to save this. We're going to come over here. Instead of post, this is going to be get. And then right here, we're going to say author ID equals, and we're going to pass in this author ID. We're going to say ampersand. We're going to say limit equals 1, ampersand page equals 1. So we send that. We can see we have just the most recent post. If we set this limit to 10 and we send this, we're going to get 10. If we set the page to like 2, now we can see we're getting the older posts. So there it is. If you learned something, subscribe. You want to learn some more? Watch this video right here. See you next time.